Okay, you're on the air.
All right. Oh, good morning. Lehiana kitona ikanchola nakopta naka ki wapilat kankai pe. Le is KILI radio ogna le takuku Oglala pichali le yomakpi. Ma mi take pi lila ni tita ke ota ahani. Lila tekha omani ipi. Chanke henana ku kiksuyape. Na la petu ki mish alana isam la taku Oglala ki wapasti. Yunkan lila na ku yuanka emangle. Ma hena ahani atash. Ata yachinkanka nichap niche ID card nichap niche taku ota tokea ahani Lakota ki ungununi pi. The reservation aka le piki. Nalena wichasha ki lechia ka kimini owan chat kanka ka kia England ka ko ihuni pi. Chahenana ku lila wa blonde chana one blaka chana yomak pi yuanke emangle. Chalehina ki ake le hena Oglala tena dona nakop tanaka ki ogna kiksuya pe. Ni tita ke nish ni tiwa he imahe. Ogna Oglala kapseche. Ogna tanka kaki Oglala kabhana. Ogna hena ku Oglala kapseche. Ogna ni tita ke wenji ni tiosh pae nish ni tiwa he imahe. Ka kia trena ahani omani ipi. Hena ogna yaksi absteche. Na isam ni tiwa he nish ni we wata ke isam Oglala pe. Ogna yaksi agte. Na now inska yaksi ki nakula na wichasha ki hena mini owata thanka ekta wata thanka wa akaya kana. Kheha ahani omani ipi. Henana kulila wokiksia ki washte. So good morning, KILI listeners. This is Cecilia Firethunder. You know, it's 9 o'clock and I've been rushing around all morning, so I'm kind of breathless. And, you know, we usually have a number of people joining me on this call. Amanda's out doing some stuff, and then Candy Ironcloud, as many of you heard last radio broadcast, was able to share with you other ways to find more information about your family. Why is this program important? This program is important for the simple reason that I hope it instills in you a desire to know more about your family. It also brings family together to talk about members of your family who have traveled across that great big Atlantic Ocean to England and other parts of the world. I earlier, when I was talking about it in Lakota, it would just maybe the more I read about it, the more I learned about this Wild West shows, it made me realize that many of our ancestors had taken a big risk to travel to a country far from here and to be able to share those stories and memories. You know, sometimes people like to put stuff down, you know, sometimes people like to yashicha things of the past. But I look at this endeavor to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a big ship to go and share with people across the ocean who we are. It may have been done in a format of a show. However, it allowed those people across the ocean a glimpse into who we are. You know, show Indians, the Wild West show Indians is what they called it. It's a term for Native American performers hired by the Wild West shows, most notably in the Buffalo Bill Wild West show and Congress of Rough Riders. The show Indians were primarily Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota. Performers took part in reenacting historic battles, demonstrating equestrian and performing dances for audience. Many veterans of the Great Plains Indian Wars participated in the Wild West show during the time. And also, as we're doing the research, there's other things that were going on in their lives back here on their homeland. Anyway, so during the time when the Office of Indian Affairs with intent on promoting Native assimilation. Many went on to act on and silent films. So when we hear about the Wild West shows, there are many interesting comments that are made. But the most important thing that I want to share with you today, and as I talk, I'm hoping you're listening to take a note. As we're talking about the history of our relatives who went across the ocean to perform in the Wild West shows, I'm also encouraging you to think about other relatives. One of the things that I know Candy talks about this, and when she was at Oglala Lakota College in the library, they relied on her to do some history, to go back to the records, find names of relatives. Many times people went to Candy Ironcloud at Oglala Lakota College to be able to get the history of who they are so they can fill out that form to be enrolled. And so again, there was just so much information out there. I think the other thing that I think is really important as you're listening today is Nituehe. Who are you? Nitiwake due nitiwaheki duepihe. Who are your family? And this day, at this time in our existence, not only on the Pine Ridge Reservation, but across the many other tribal reservations and communities in our region, many things have happened to us. And along the way, we may have lost photographs, we may have lost pieces of information that we kept, or maybe your grandma kept, or maybe your great-grandma kept, that got lost along the way. These documents and these photos tell the story of who you are as an individual person or as a member of a family, a tioshpaye, and more often a community. It's important for us doing this program to not only talk about our relatives who went across the ocean to participate in the Wild West shows. It's important for us, for you to think about who your relatives are who were there, but also today, right now, at this moment, to take the time to find out more about who you are and where you come from. So today I want to talk a little bit more about some other pieces of information as we talk about this important part of our Lakota history. You know, and so if many of us have access to a computer, so you can Google information. And, you know, one of the things I like to laugh about is somebody said, gee, you're really smart. I said, I know, I have a PhD. Really? Where is it from? I said, Google University. Anything I need to know, I can get up at 6 in the morning, turn on my computer, type in a letter, a word, or something, and all of this information will pop up. And it's really exciting for me. And sometimes I have to discipline myself because I can get carried away and be on the computer for at least 1 or 2 hours. And I know some of you who are listening probably know that. But this morning at 9:14, this is Cecilia Firethunder talking over KILI radio as we continue this information program on the Wild West show. And for those of you who are listening, you may have heard bits and pieces of it. So hopefully this program will kind of get you to want to know more, because built into the Wild West story history are other pieces of history that pertain to us as a community. So this morning, as I was looking for more information, I found some information from a blog from the across the ocean from Great Britain. Anyway, so there was a professor who was writing about the Wild West show. He says that the Buffalo Bill's Wild West show had already thrilled huge audiences in the USA. When in 1887, now think about these dates as I'm talking to you, 1887, and then think about where your family and your relatives were in 1887. What was going on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1887? What were some of the actions taken? And then here again, the boundaries of the Pine Ridge Reservation were established when? And that was 1891 when they broke up the Great Sioux Nation. Ocheti Shakoni ata yuhapdalo kumyunka ata timahiun ata yujujupi. So when they created the boundaries of the Pine Ridge Reservation, what they basically did was they split up the Oceti-Sakowee tribe. So they put Pine Ridge here, Rosebud there, Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, Lower Brule, across this whole reach, and they broke us up and put us in different places. So when you think about the concept, divide and conquer, think about that, okay? So Buffalo Bill Wild West Show has already thrilled audiences in the US in 1887. It crossed the Atlantic Ocean to take London by storm. Imagine that. London is in England across the Atlantic Ocean. If you fly today, if you take a big airplane across the Atlantic Ocean from New York City to London, England, that's like about a 3-hour flight, maybe a 4-hour flight. So imagine back in 1887, if you had to cross the Atlantic Ocean on a ship, it probably took weeks to get to London, England. Anyway, so, and he said to take London by storm, crowds thronged the streets to catch a glimpse of the cavalcade of over 800 performers. 800 performers, 180 horses, 18 buffalo, 10 elk, 2 deer, and 5 Texas Longhorns as they arrived at a purpose-built arena in Earl's Court. 2.5 million Londoners would buy tickets to see the show's extravagant rendering of life on America's Wild West frontier. William Cody, aka Buffalo Bill, later noted in his autobiography, quote, when our spectacle was finally given, it was received with such a burst of enthusiasm as I had never witnessed anywhere. Powerfully persuasive, and the spectacle of Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show was at the core of the project's concern. It enabled millions of Britons to see real live Indians and to believe that they now understood both the romance and the horror. As the 3 tours also brought to Britain larger groups of Native Americans that had never previously crossed the Atlantic Ocean. All of them traveled far and wide across the country, visiting more than 170 English, 30 Scottish, and 20 Welsh towns and cities, carrying their memories and stories back home to their reservation communities. And so that brings me to this part of the program, and that so many Lakota families who somebody in their family went across the ocean, came home and shared those stories with them. How they took a train from Nebraska across the United States to New York Harbor and then boarded a ship to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine that, relatives. Imagine back in 1887, in 1888, 1890, way before media, way before television, way before information, our ancestors, your ancestors, people from our community, crossed the ocean to go somewhere far, far away. I really think that's so amazing. Anyway, so in this this is a blog site from England, which I discovered, and it was really interesting that by the time the show traveled to London for the first time, Cody was almost exclusively hiring Lakota, predominantly from the Pine Ridge and Rosebud agencies in Dakota Territory. This was sometimes confusing, as the Lakota were also required to represent other tribes. In other words, even though they were Lakotas, they would then label them another tribe, like a Ponca or another tribe. And so in the history, Lakota people were given another label, like a chief of another tribe, just for your information. Anyway, Anyway, for example, not just in arena, but on publicity cards, for example. And here, for those of you who are listening, one of your ancestors' name was Little Bull. Little Bull was one of the ones who went across the ocean. Another one was Blue Horse. And so, for example, Little Bull, Lakota, was presented as the chief of the Arapahoes, just to create this show scenario. And Blue Horse, Lakota, as chief of the Shoshone. And so they were throwing all these other chiefs, tribes into the mix. So they were given different titles. So those of you who are listening, so remember the name Little Bull was one of your ancestors that crossed the Atlantic Ocean to go to England and perform and for that. And then the other one was Blue Horse, as I mentioned, who also was Lakota from Pine Ridge, who went across the ocean. The other thing was for Cody, that's Lakota recruitment policy alleviated intertribal rivalries, and they only required the services of a single interpreter. It also added a tilting savor of the authenticity. Let me go back. Authenticity when Custer's Last Stand was reenacted. Now, many of you probably heard about this and saw this in other things, maybe movies, where Custer's Last Stand seemed to be a big draw. And I hear it's coming close, so the Battle of the Little Bighorn is something that Lakota people today really need to look at and celebrate, because that was the first and last time the United States Cavalry Regiment, led by George Custer, was wiped out. And that's our history, and that is in the books for the rest of our lives. And on the flip side of that, that was also one of the reasons why those white people on the East Coast, just Akhni and Lakota people, because, the white people don't like to be defeated, but that's another story for another time. Although there were 7 separate Lakota bands, and within these were divisions and different views, all had been touched by warfare with the United States Army and the government's relentless drive to confine them on reservations and acquire their Dakota homeland. When the Lakota, listen to this, audience, when the Lakota people, your relatives, boarded the SF, state of Nebraska, in 1887, in April 1887, our ancestors, your ancestors, boarded a ship called the SS, state of Nebraska, to travel to England. At that time, Congress had just passed the Dawes General Allotment Act. This act would prove disastrous for all Native Americans because it legalized the destruction of the communal land holdings, thus facilitating their progressive disposition. So when we began to take a look at what was going on there and today, all of this historical actions and events coincide and come together. One of the things in England, when responding to a question about the future of his people posed by a reporter from the Central News, Redshirt, who is from the western part of our reservation, northwestern part, and Redshirt, as many of you have probably seen photographs of him. And many of you who are listening may come from his lineage. So when they interviewed Redshirt, who was part of the group that was in London at that time, they asked him what the opposing reporter, what was the main spokesperson. Anyway, he gave an answer, and I'm going to quote what his answer was back in 1888. This is what Redshirt said. The Indian of the next generation will not be the Indian of the last. Our buffaloes are nearly all gone. The deer have entirely vanished, and the white man takes more and more of our land. But the United States government are good. True, it has taken away our land, and the white men have eaten up our deer and our buffaloes. But the government now gives us food that we may not starve. They are educating our children. Now we are dependent on the rations of the government, but we feel we are entitled to that bounty. It is part of the price they pay for the land they have taken from us, and some compensation for us for having killed off the herds upon which we subsisted. For myself, I know it is no use fighting against the United States government, unquote. Red shirt words plainly state the desperate situation of the Lakota and perhaps also serve as a tactic explanation for why we had joined the show. Although he was speaking to a reporter through an interpreter, his speech offers a good example of how interviews in newspaper articles such as this can be read across the grain to reveal evidence of Native American views and concerns. However, despite Red Shirt's candor, it is extremely unlikely that in the absence of images like the one below, where our people were standing in line in 1890 for the commodity warehouse, and I'm sure many of you who are listening to this program have seen that picture. Families wrapped in blankets and shawls standing, waiting for the door to open to get their commodities. Red Shirt, like many others who signed up with William Cody, included American Horse, Blue Horse, Little Bull, Little Chief, and Fly-the-Pup. They had all been real warriors and participated in battles. In 1880, he had been the youngest member of Red Claw's Pine Ridge delegation to Washington, D.C. That's a little, and then they went to Washington, D.C. to talk to the government, where he joined Headman, Red Dog, Little Wound, American Horse. Among others, there were more than 30 Lakota leaders to sign an agreement granting the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad a right-of-way across the land. Awareness of such events alerts us to the status as many of the Lakota Wild Westers and to the leadership whose roles were bigger and greater, and so before they became performable. I share this with you only because it's also part of our history. You know, it's interesting for me, listeners, that so much information is out there, quotes written in newspapers across England, pictures of images taken that are in archives, probably in some of the London storehouses where our people travel. Anyway, in England, this is part of the Wild West history. William Cody appointed Red Shirt to be the chief of the suit. He gave him all these titles for the sake of the show, but perhaps did not realize the experience he had already had. So here's another interesting comment on Red Shirt. The quote, he said, Cody writes, quote, "It was interesting to watch Red Shirt when he was presented to the Queen of England. He clearly felt that this was a ceremony between one ruler and another. And the dignity in which he went through the introduction was wonderful to behold. One would have thought to watch him that most of his life was spent in introduction to kings and queens, and that he was really a little bored with the effort required to go through with him." In other words, our Red Shirt, who was esteemed, honorable man, was presented to the Queen of England, and he took that opportunity to rise to his status. Queen Victoria, for Cody, Queen Victoria request for a private command performance of the Wild West show was the high point of his first English tour. Cody's observation that Red Shirt appeared both relaxed and dignified when meeting the Queen of England serves as a reminder that as one of the principal chiefs of the Oglala Lakota, Red Shirt had already experienced interactions and negotiations between one ruler and another when far more had been at stake. I hope that you heard that and listened to that. And remember, these are all real things that happen. You know, today we don't have, and back in 1887, 88, we didn't have telephones, we didn't have internet, we didn't have the media. Today, anything that happens across the ocean, anywhere, boom, boom, that fast, it'll pop up on your television screen. That fast, it'll pop up on your computer screen, something that happens somewhere. So this information is real information, documented and kept in archives. I just wanted to share that with you. The time is now 9:31. You are listening to Cecilia Firethunder, and this is a program around the Wild West Show, Bill Cody's Wild West Show. And we're doing these programs hoping that the listeners are also thinking about their family, and maybe some stories in your family about somebody in your family or Tioshpai that went across the ocean to participate in the Wild West Show. Not only to talk about this stuff, but our hope, as I know Amanda and Candy and I, our hope is that it motivates you and encourages you who are listening to take the time to find out who you are. Take the time to do a more, and I know Candy, we've talked about this before, it's really exciting that more and more people are doing family trees and to connect all of who you come from back 3, 4, or 5 generations, to go back to your great, 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 great grandparents. I also want to say something, and this is a very important comment I need to make. Too often people want to be associated with a chief. People want to say my ancestor was Chief so-and-so and Chief so-and-so. Well, ladies and gentlemen, many of us, our ancestors were really good human beings. We may not have the lineage of a chief, but we have the lineage of some amazing good people. Our great-great-grandparents, my great-great-great-grandmother, our great-great-great-grandfather had values that provided guidance. They had values and skills and abilities that taught us to be here today, like me talking over KILI radio as a 76-year-old Lakota woman. Who taught me what I know? Well, the first person is my dad, Stephen Apple. The next person next to him as a partner, him and my mom were partners with Lolly Featherman Apple. And so those two human beings who created me, not only created me, but guided me, loved me, cherished me, and raised me and took care of me. But along the way, immersed in my Tioshpayan and Inkpata, within the Kiaksa, were my grandparents and my aunts and uncles. So who I am was guided by some amazing Lakota men and women. So we talk about boarding school. We talk about the influences that we had. And today I want to share with you that even though I went to boarding school for 10 years, from 1st grade to 10th grade at Holy Rosary Mission, 1953 to 1963, I never lost my language. And today I attribute not losing my language because my parents, my mom and dad, spoke Lakota to me and my sisters. And when we were home in south of Kyle, around Inkpata, along the Medicine Root Creek, we heard Lakota. Our grandma, Kaka, Unchi, Kaka, John Featherman, and Unchi Lizzie, Woksape Featherman, and all of our Unchis, and then grandmas and grandpas, and also all of our aunts and uncles, everybody, Lakota Woglakapi. So for 3 months out of 12 months that I was home on vacation, I was totally immersed in Lakota language. So that to me was a blessing. Today, in the year 2023, I attribute my being able to continue to speak my language because my parents valued it. And today, many of us take classes on language. Many of us take these courses on language. And so I personally appreciate the classes because it enhances not just the language, but the foundation of our existence as Lakota people, the foundation of our values and our morals, the foundation of relationships, the foundation of all that we need to know as a human being is in the language. And this is why so many of us really promote and encourage the Lakota language to be taught in our schools, so that it provides that foundation and a sense of identity. So I don't have any chiefs in my family, I don't think, but I have some amazing human beings who taught me all the things I need to know today to be able to live a good life, and most of all, Hechna Lakota Wichhóoyake. I'm sorry, I just had to throw that in on the side as well. But today we're talking about the Wild West show that was part of our history and our culture, and hope that those of you who are listening think about your family at some point during your family gatherings that you talked about this. And so we need to really encourage you if you want to help. So again, our contact information, if you want to continue this dialogue, and Amanda gave her information at the last show, but I just want to share with you, you're going to have to text Cecilia Firethunder. And my cell phone is 407-2470, or if you are on Facebook, I can also respond to you if you Facebook me and send me a message. Now, the reason I'm asking you to text me, my relatives, is I'm deaf. And many times I don't have my ears on, so my phone can ring and I won't hear you. If you text me, I can see the text message, and then I'll put my ears on and call you back. And so I just want to give you that information. So again, if you're listening to this program, you are listening to this Wild West, a variety of history. The other interesting thing is that the history of the Wild West show is always, it's about this history of who we are as Oglala Lakota people. Anyway, so the other, I just want to continue talking about the payment. So one of the things that many of our information that we have is that was the first time our ancestors who took part in a Wild West show were paid. They were given a salary. And in some of the reports that came that we have, so sometimes they didn't spend their money. So when they came back, they had some money in their pocket. Anyway, hundreds of Native Americans would serve in the show between 1883 and 1917. Performers were hired per season and were paid for their time that they were in the show. Recruiting would happen. Now listen to this relative. The recruiting would happen in Rushville, Nebraska, just across the border. So how many of you know where Rushville is? Of course, we all know where Rushville is. So that's where the major recruiting took place. Indians were central to the Wild West show from the very beginning. In the first 1883 show in Omaha, Nebraska, 6 of the 12 performances, including the opening parade, employed all Indians from Pine Ridge. Colonel Cody shifted his hiring to Pine Ridge Agency in 1885. Remember the date, 1885. That was a long time ago, my relative, but this is who we are. Our history goes back so far back. In 1885, after hiring the famous Hunkpapa Lakota to Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull carried a reputation as a killer of George Armstrong Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and the last Native American to surrender to the government during the American Indian Wars. He joined the show in Buffalo, New York on June 12, 1885. Although he toured for only one season, Sitting Bull set the course for all subsequent show Indian employment. His employment represented a shift to Lakota as the preferred show Indian. In other words, of all the Indians, they preferred Lakota. Wow, I know some of you, I hope, are smiling when I said that. They preferred Lakota. His employment represented this shift to Lakota. The reputation of the Sioux as warriors confirmed the image of Indians held in American and European minds. The use of Native performance in the Wild West shows reflected the broad interest in Native people within American culture in the late 19th and early 20th century. You know, so as I'm reading this, I'm hoping you're listening. And so back in 1885 to what years did I say? To 1887, 88, 89. Imagine how many years ago was that? Your ancestors and those people who represented Lakota people were already doing what we call public relations. So they went across the ocean, many oacha, tanka, wata, ship. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean to go to this place. And they had imagined the courage it took. You know, how many of you who are listening, sometimes I hear this, even today, they don't want to go anywhere. Oh, I don't want to go. I don't want to get on that airplane. Oh, I've never been to Chicago. Oh, I've never been to New York. And even me today, I could attest to that. You know, the first time I went to New York City, and I hope Carleen Hunter is listening. Carleen Hunter and I went to New York City many, many years ago and on a fundraiser for KILI Radio. Some of you may not know this, but please, I hope that KILI shares the story with you. There was a radio station in Manhattan, New York City, Manhattan, which is part of New York City, who was part of building KILI Radio. This radio station was probably on the 18th floor in the city of Manhattan. I know Tiny DeCory went, her and I went one year as well. So this radio station broadcast every year, and this radio station apparently reached across donor states and the listeners. And then we had volunteers that came to man the telephones as people were calling in donations to raise money for KILI Radio. So I hope somebody listening follows up on this. So I remember Carleen and I, you know, and my first trip to New York City, I'll be honest with you, I was really nervous. And even though I lived in California and traveled different places, my relatives flying into New York City was a pretty scary event. So I'm thinking, how about our relatives who took a train from Nebraska, traveled across the United States to the New York Harbor in 1885 and to board a ship, not really knowing exactly how long that trip was going to take to go to a country called England and to share with those people who we are. I want to also reiterate that what they did took a lot of courage, but most importantly, I look at it as a way for those people across the ocean to kind of have a sense of who we are and who we were as Lakota people. And so that the show itself was, I considered, a really amazing public relations effort to share with people who knew nothing about it. Again, way before internet, way before television, and share those people. And I have to also share with you, and I'll do it later, a quote. And so there was so much wonderful things that were said to us after these performances, okay? All right, so anyway, so let me keep going here. So again, don't remember the commemoration of the Battle of the Little Bighorn is going to be this week as well. And I know a lot of people, there's going to be some events happening. And I also want to reiterate that at the same time, the Wild West show, our Lakota people were going across the ocean. There were actions taken over here in our homeland. Anyway, so one of the other things that the Office of Indian Affairs worried about the effect of the shows on its assimilation policies. The battle between the government and show promoters was over whose image of American Indians would prevail. In 1886, the Office of Indian Affairs began regulating the hiring of Native American performers in the shows, and by 1889 required Indians to sign individual contracts with the shows under the supervision of the Office of Indian Affairs agents. Only after fulfilling the new stipulation of the Office of Indian Affairs would the commissioner grant Indians permission to leave the reservation. The employment of Indians in unauthorized shows was particularly worrisome for the Office of Indian Affairs, which feared that having Indians under the employ of a show without the guarantee of care and protection would lead to degrading employee health and morals, etc. Anyway, the Office of Indian Affairs under Thomas Jefferson Morgan, who became commissioner in the summer of 1889, was especially critical of Indian employment in the Wild West shows. Although he could do little without the contract already signed, he attacked in public and in print the seemingly failures of the shows to meet the obligation of the contract. So he was like, being critical of it. One of the things he also tried, in effect, preventing Indians from joining these shows. Morgan also threatened aspiring Indian performers by withholding land allotments, annuities, and travel status. A threatened show promoted with the loss of their bonds if they neglected to uphold the contractual obligations, etc. And then the only thing acceptable to this Office of Indian Affairs director was for Indians to quit the show. Here's an interesting story for those of you who are listening. In 1890, Indian Lakotas whose names were No Neck and Blackheart testified in inquiry before the Office of Indian Affairs. The hearing weighed the morality of Indian employment in the show business. 1890. Quote, "You are engaged in the exhibition or show business," unquote, observed the acting commissioner, A.C. Belt. "It is not considered among white people a very helpful or elevating business. I believe that which is not good." And anyway, the Indians defended their work as adamantly as any white performer, and they turned the inquiry into a pointed denunciation of Indian policies by comparing the conditions in the show with those on a Pine Ridge agency. This is in 1890. Remember that date, 1890. What was going on in Pine Ridge Reservation in 1890? Where were your relatives and ancestors living on the reservation in 1890? Were they living in the Wombly area, in the Martin area, Allen area, Kyle, Porcupine, Wounded Knee, Wakbamini, and all the way to Oglala? Where were your ancestors living in 1890, for those of you who are listening? The contrast was because of the conditions on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1890. Think about what was going on in 1890. Did we have offices? Did we have employment? Did we have factories? Did we have roads? Were we able to live off the land? Remember, in 1890, my relatives who are listening, there was no electricity. Many of us, like me, grew up in Inkpata. We didn't have running water. We had to pump our water from the pump just down and carry it up in buckets. We didn't have electricity. We had kerosene lamps. That was 1950s and 1960s. We still did not have those amenities that we enjoy today. So anyway, so in 1890, imagine this, the income that these performers got was probably the first time anybody in our family got a paycheck or were paid for doing a job. Anyway, so Rocky Bear began by pointing out that he long had served the interests of the federal government by encouraging the development of Indian reservations. He worked in a show that fed him well. Quote, That is why I am getting so fat, he said, stroking his cheeks, unquote, and everybody laughed. It was only in returning, this is what he said, only when I returned to the reservation that I am getting poor. If the great white father wanted him to stop appearing in the show, he would stop. But until then, that is the way I get money. When he showed the people who were questioning him a purse filled with $300 in gold coins, saying, I saved this money. Listen to this. I saved this money to buy some clothes for my children, unquote. Blackheart, too, denounced the allegation of mistreatment. We were raised on horseback. That is the way we had to work. Buffalo Bill Cody and Nate Salisbury furnished us the same work we were raised to, and that is the reason we want to work for these kind men. In other words, the kind of work they were doing in the Wild West show was the same thing that they were doing to feed their families back in 1890, 1887, 1888, 1899. They were riding horseback and they were killing buffalo, they were killing deer. And that was way before we had those, I have to say this, those four-legged that they brought over, they're immigrants. How many of you know cows are immigrants? I'll probably catch out for saying this. Cows are not indigenous to our land. So that was way before cows were brought to our reservation. So what he was basically saying was that the work that was given to them was the same thing they were doing to provide for their family, riding horses and shooting deer and buffalo to feed them and provide clothing with the hides that they got. So in essence, what he said at that hearing was that the work they gave us was how we used to live. The only thing different is they gave us money, so that money we could bring it home and buy clothing for our children. So again, let me repeat this. So when they were inquiring and between Nonek and Blackheart, they were testified in inquiry about their work in a Wild West show. He said, and so again, he said, when he was working the Wild West show, he was paid. When he came home to Pine Ridge in 1890, they were poor, but there was no work. And they had to rely on the commodities. They had to stand in line in front of the commodity warehouse to get food. And what he said is, but until then, he said it was only in returning to the reservation that I am getting poor. If the great white father wanted him to stop appearing to the show, he would stop. But until then, that is the way I get money. When he showed his inquisitors, and I'm repeating this because I want you to hear this, a purse filled with $300 in gold coins, he said, I saved this money to buy some clothes for my children. They denounced the allegation of mistreatment as being performers in a Wild West show. Again, I want to repeat this quote. We were raised on horseback. That way we had to work. So what the Wild West show did was they furnished us the same way we were raised. And that is the reason we want to work for these men. Many of the show Indians were Oglalas from the Pine Ridge Reservation and welcomed the opportunity to travel with Colonel Cody. Native American performers and their families were able to free themselves for 6 months each year from the degrading, listen to this, from the degrading confines of the government reservation where the boundaries were established, where they were forbidden to wear tribal dress, hunt, or dance. Native American performers were treated well by Colonel Cody and received wages, food, transportation, and living accommodation while far away from their homes. Listen to this. I want you to listen to this because that not only did individuals go to the Wild West show, their families went with them. And many families, again, who are listening, think about many times in your family, who in your family, your Tioshpaya, your community went on the Wild West show. Show Indians. So again, think about that time when we were forbidden to sing our songs, practice our ceremonies. And as this program comes to a close, I want to remind us right now is sacred time. Right now, we are able to cross this whole community, not only Pine Ridge, but the Great Plains region, and that we are performing one of our most sacred ceremonies, and that is our Wiwangwachi. And there was a time when we could not do that. We could not practice our Sundance. And many times, a time long ago, they would arrest and put in jail the leaders of our people who wanted to practice their sacred Sundance. It was considered a crime. So today, I want you to think about where we are today. Today, I want you to be grateful for the struggles and the battles that took place to bring us to this day in the year 2023, where we can then once again practice our most sacred ceremony. I also want to, as I bring this program to a close, I want to encourage you to continue to think about not only the Wild West show, but other events that your families participate in. As I bring this show to a close, I want you to think not only about World War I, but before World War I, many of our family members went to Cuba with Teddy Roosevelt as Rough Riders. I smile when I say Rough Riders because when I was growing up and not long ago in the Kyle community in the Medicine Route, we had a drum group called the Rough Riders. And these Rough Riders were older men and they knew all the old songs. And the Rough Riders were the first drum group that ever performed and helped when Little One School became a 10297 school back in 1977. The Rough Riders were the drum group that came to the school as we began to extract ourselves from BIA to become a local control school. The time is now 9:58. And I hope that this program allowed you to think about some things, allowed us to see how resilient we are. There's a long history of things that happened to us as Lakota Oglala people, but listen, relatives. Hechina Unipi, Hechina Lakota Wonglakapi, Hechina Oloa ki ahi unyapi, na le ape tuke enagnagia, Hechina Wiwangwachipi. Wiwangwachipi kenanta you only ha echumpi hunter. Iuha ini unkiwashlepi. And na henana go watch it unkahapi. Le apetuna le wiki imahel and nagnankel, we want what she picked them. When we chashaki hena, we want what she picky, my air unkie to hena unkiwash de picked them. Hena watch it kikahapi, ishnala pikteshni, you hakina unkiuk jumpy, to helena go wapila hecha. To oyaki hip hunter mitake pi le wiki. Daya we jump in. Nataku inika meki, now we want what you biki walk check a kaha pitch and good and kiksuya penisha tungashila. Now oyate honey iapiki, Naku ashna upi na awa oyankapi. I encourage everybody to take this time this month to pray and pray with those who are dancing somewhere in our homeland. Capture the power of their prayer to help you release and remove things that you don't want to carry with you, but most of all, but this time is 10 a.m. and this is Cecilia Firethunder. My cell phone is 605-407-2470. Again, text me because I'll respond better than when you call me because I may not hear the phone. If you want to have a further conversation, I have a Facebook page. You can message me. Remember, our ancestors set the foundation for who we are, and doggone it, we're still here. So we have an obligation to use history as our stepping stone into the future. And because that you have it. I'd like to leave you with good thoughts. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.